She also begins writing a journal because Jonathan has been. Is this really ridiculous, me talking this seriously with these teeth? Hello my loves, welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about just one book, a whole video about one book, because I have a lot to say about this book and I'm probably a bit late to the party about it. But we're talking about Dracula by Bram Stoker, which is the only book I read last month, which is why I didn't do a wrap up, because I wanted to do a whole video just on this book. I have bought vampire teeth for this video. I'm hoping I will get a fair bit of use out of these teeth because I've been reading a lot of vampire books recently and I love vampires. They're not the best teeth, so don't look too closely. One, they're a different colour to the rest of my teeth. I am aware of that. Two, they're like little, I don't know what they are, the stuff that they give you so it fits your teeth. The like moulding stuff.
I heard him say to his dental nurse, Fuji 9.
They tell you to put way too much in. So even though I put significantly less in, it was still too much and it's like spilling out because these teeth are actually relatively long as they are. So don't look too close because you can see the moulding. You can see the moulding that has come out on either side of the teeth. But I thought it would be fun to wear vampire teeth while talking about I was gonna say the original vampire book, but it's not the original vampire book. I haven't read the original, the one that was published before this. I can't remember what it's called. Is it called Carmilla? I don't know, but I am gonna read that. Anyway, it just felt appropriate to have these teeth in. Just don't look at them too closely. Okay, so I do just want to, not necessarily a disclaimer, but I think I already know what I'm gonna title this video. And I would just like to stress that this is a very unserious discussion of this book, hence the fucking teeth. Okay, I did not do an English degree. I didn't even do English literature at A-level. I started doing it, but I dropped it because I wasn't enjoying it. Kind of wish I hadn't done that now, but anyway, I have no credentials to be talking about this, is what I'm trying to say. So if you are here because maybe you are studying English literature and Dracula is one of the books you're talking about, maybe don't take what I'm saying very seriously. There might be some points in here that yes are very relevant, but I feel like my interpretation of this book is not the way an English literature teacher would want you to interpret this book. So that's just a small little disclaimer there. But anyway, let's get into it. So, the premise of the book, in case you don't know, which to be honest, I actually didn't know. I knew this was a book, obviously, about vampires. I knew it was about Dracula, and it's widely cited as the original vampire novel, but I didn't actually really know too much about what happened in it before I picked it up. So, the premise of this story is, firstly, all of the book is done through either journal entries or there's occasional newspaper clippings or things like that. And we start with the journal entries of Jonathan Harker. Jonathan is a solicitor who is traveling over to Romania to meet Count Dracula, who he doesn't know is a vampire at this point, to help him finalize all the paperwork for a house that the Count is buying in England. So Jonathan goes over and stays there for, I can't remember how long exactly, maybe like a couple of weeks. And throughout his stay there, he quite quickly starts to realise that something is not quite right about the house or about Count Dracula. And we see all of that from his perspective in his journals. He's sort of keeping that log before we then move into some of the other characters' journals and insights that we get. There is a collection of characters that we meet. So the first other one is Mina, who at the beginning of the story is Jonathan's fiance. Initially we're introduced to her through letters that she's writing to her friend Lucy, and she then eventually goes and stays with her friend Lucy. So through Mina's journal, we kind of get the view of her and the view of Lucy. Mina is someone who in her like journal entries comes across as someone who is very clever, very intelligent, very to the point, almost not scientific in her writing, but she's not writing journal entries in terms of emotion. It's quite factual. I suppose is the best way to put her. And then we get a glimpse into Lucy through her letters that she exchanges with Mina. Lucy does write a few journal entries, but they're not till later on, and there's not really very many of them. So we mainly get that insight through the lens of Mina, and also through the letters that Lucy sends to Mina. Lucy comes across as quite a bit more, not extravagant, but more extroverted, more driven by emotion than logic, which Mina seems to be more driven by. Lucy's whole problem is there are 3 men who want to marry her, and she met all of them. She's struggling to pick one, even though there is one that she likes more than the others. And what she says is, why can't they let a girl marry 3 men, or as many as want her, and save all this trouble? But this is heresy, and I must not say it. And that is that kind of quote there is a point that I will come on to later. But we are introduced to Lucy as this kind of, especially for the time, I suppose that would have been quite scandalous. That would have been not something that women should say or would say or should even think. So we see sort of that side of her quite early. So her and Mina are quite different, but they're good friends. We also meet, I'm gonna be honest, I just saw his name. I don't actually remember what his name is. I think is it Dr. Seward? I don't actually know how to pronounce his name either, but I just called him Dr. Seaweed the whole way through the book, so that is what I'm going to refer to him as in this video. Dr. Seaweed, we get his journal entries before he's really entangled in the main plot. So all of these characters eventually, even though they're maybe a bit separate, all eventually end up coming together, and they're all connected through things that Dracula has done. Dr. Seaweed is quite far removed from that to begin with. He owns a psychiatric hospital. We're just getting journal entries about specifically one of his patients. Dr. Seaweed, I hate it. I really did not enjoy his character at all. Every time it came up to be one of his chapters, it was just like,
fucking guy.
Did not like him. And I think I will touch on a little bit more again why I didn't like him, and to be honest, why I didn't like most of the men in this book a bit later. He then brings in Van Helsing, who we all know the name Van Helsing, the infamous vampire hunter, or the original vampire hunter Van Helsing. Van Helsing is also a doctor who worked with, I think he might have helped train Dr. Seaweed, I don't really remember, but they've worked quite closely together. So when Lucy suddenly starts falling quite ill, and Dr. Seaweed doesn't know what's going on, he calls on the help of Van Helsing, and he comes and is doing all this stuff. And for someone who is supposed to be, you know, the best vampire hunter, and to be fair, they don't claim this in the book, this is partly just me with, you know, media interpretations from this afterwards, but for someone who's supposed to be really knowledgeable, know like everything about vampires, it takes him a really fucking long time to realise what's happening to Lucy, even though it's really quite obvious what's happening to her. But anyway, so Van Helsing is then a constant person that stays there. When he realises it's Dracula that's making Lucy ill, he is there to try and use all of the things that he knows to try and protect Lucy and stop bad things happening to her, or to try and thwart Dracula, essentially. And he's just kind of an annoying presence in the book, honestly. He talks too much. You know, things could have been resolved a lot quicker if he wasn't so obsessed with giving really fucking long speeches every 5 minutes. He talks a lot, but doesn't say a lot. He's one of those kinds of characters. And the general theme of the men in this book just being kind of incompetent, but acting like they're competent, is something that comes up frequently, and I will talk about again a little bit more later. We then have 2 other characters who, to be honest, I'm just kind of gonna lump together because I feel like they very much just got forgotten about and just became almost background characters that didn't really have much personality. And that was Quincy Jones, who is an American man who wanted to marry Lucy, and then there's Arthur, who is a lord who ended up marrying. Did they actually get married? I don't remember. He was also one of the ones who wanted to marry Lucy, and she picked him as the one. Oh, Dr. Seward was the other one. Did I say his name right? Dr. Seaweed. was the other one who wanted to marry Lucy. And he just never fucking got over it, and it pissed me off. Anyway, Arthur specifically started with having more of a personality and more of a presence, and I suppose that was more so when Lucy was still alive. He had more of a personality. He seemed very sweet. He seemed like a very nice man. And then after Lucy dies and they start them sort of rallying their group to try and end Dracula once and for all, Arthur just very much becomes a background character that doesn't really say anything, doesn't really have any other personality other than he's rich, which was kind of disappointing because he was one of the only men that I actually didn't mind. Jonathan being the other one that I didn't mind too much, but the rest of them I just hated them all. Quincy, like I say, is an American man, and that is pretty much his entire personality, is that he's American and he uses Winchester guns. And he has a weirdly overinflated sense of confidence about hunting down a vampire, even though he has no basis to be that confident about it. That is his entire personality. We don't really see him too much. He doesn't really talk that much. He again is sort of more of a background character that it seems like wasn't focused on as much, but to be honest I didn't mind that because I found him quite annoying. But this is sort of our gang of characters, including Jonathan as well, and by the end of the story these are the gang, apart from Lucy, who are then wanting to try and fight Dracula, essentially. So to summarise, I suppose, how all of these characters are involved and how they sort of all progress into the plot. So obviously, like I said, we start off with Jonathan. He is it called Dracula Castle? I don't remember. He's at the Count's house. His journal entries sort of stop very suddenly and we are left for a while not really knowing what's happened to him after he's experienced sort of a lot of fear and sort of strange things whilst being in Dracula's home. We then swap to Lucy's point of view through letters to Mina for a bit, and then we sort of fully go into Mina's point of view. So the letters between Lucy and Mina are very much just about who Lucy's going to marry, and also Mina talking a little bit about Jonathan and how she can't wait to marry him and stuff like that. So they don't really add too much to the plot, aside from, I think, sort of showing their characters a little bit more. We then, like I say, go into Mina's point of view, and this is where she has then travelled to see Lucy by the sea, I think they are. Travels to stay with Lucy because Lucy's not been very well, I think, maybe. And so we're then seeing from Mina's point of view with her and Lucy. Throughout her stay here, Lucy starts becoming quite ill. She's very pale, she's quite weak, and she's been sleepwalking a lot. And on one occasion, she sort of actually sleepwalks out of the house, and Mina goes and finds her in maybe like by church, I think, and there's like a figure over her, which we as the reader know is Dracula, but obviously Mina doesn't know that. So then they call for Dr. Seaweed, who comes and tries to help Mina, but he's not really sure what's going on, so he calls for Van Helsing. Oh, Mina's gone at this point as well. I think Mina's gone somewhere. Anyway, so Van Helsing arrives and he's like, this woman's lost a lot of blood. She needs a blood transfusion. And can I just say, at this point, I was already like, that's quite risky. Blood transfusions weren't really a popular thing at this time. They weren't really done because they were seen as so dangerous, and that was because we didn't have blood typing. So it was kind of a bit of a gamble of whether you were a match or not. So Arthur, who Lucy is going to marry, donates some blood and she's fine. Luckily they're a match and she's fine. She then gets drained again by Dracula, and I think this is when Van Helsing starts to be like, oh, this might be a vampire. So then Lucy has another blood transfusion from a different man, and again, luckily, I think it was Dr. Seaweed, luckily they just happen to be the same type and she's fine. So then Van Helsing starts putting garlic and shit everywhere to try and protect her. Her mum moves it all. The defences end up being ruined and Lucy is drained again. She has a blood transfusion from a different man. I think it's Quincy, or it might be Van Helsing at this point. A different man, and magically again they're the same type and she's fine. That happens one more time. She gets drained again, I don't remember how, and she has a fourth blood transfusion and she's still fine. Nothing went wrong with 4 blood transfusions from 4 different men in, let's be honest, quite unsanitary conditions, because, you know, he wasn't sterilising everything in her bedroom. So that was the most unrealistic part of this whole story for me. I know it's about vampires, but that part I actually had to pause for a minute and research the history of blood transfusions. because I was like, I just can't believe this. Anyway, Lucy, it seems like it's fine, but then something awful happens. She's drained one last time and she is dead. This is where I really started to dislike Van Helsing. So he explains everything to Dr. Seaweed and basically says, we need to cut off her head and stake her so that she doesn't rise again. And Dr. Seaweed at this point obviously doesn't believe him, and he's like, that's awful, don't do that. But eventually he does kind of start to believe this, as Lucy does start rising from the dead, and she's like kidnapping children or something, I think, as a vampire. So for some reason, Van Helsing decides to then bring everyone else on board. So Dr. Seaweed, Quincy, and Arthur all get brought on board. Arthur, considering he's just lost his fiance/wife, I can't remember if they got married or not. He's just lost his fiance, and Van Helsing literally just says, can I cut off her head? Hardly any explanation towards that. But somehow, yeah, they all get convinced to do it. They cut off her head. She doesn't rise anymore. Her soul rests. They think everything's fine. Then Mina and Jonathan come back. They all start talking. They realise it was Dracula. They know what's happening because of Jonathan's fantastic journal entries. And they're like, right, we need to take this guy down. Then they all start planning. They need to get boxes of Dracula's homeland dirt, because he needs that to be able to travel to different places, and that takes fucking ages. They talk about the dirt for probably like 100 pages without really doing much about it. So they're planning to get all these boxes of dirt so they can destroy them. He can't flee, so then when they attack him, they'll be able to attack him and defeat him. Then the same things that are happening to Lucy start happening to Mina, and no one fucking notices for a really long time. Even though they've compiled everyone's journal entries, they know exactly what happened, all the signs, and they're still just like, she's a bit under the weather. It's just the strain. It's the strain of all the stress on a woman. That's what's causing it. So yeah, it took fucking ages for them to realise what happened to Mina. They are able to protect her though, and then they destroy all the boxes of dirt. Well, actually no, then there's one missing, and then that drags on for ages as well. They destroy all the boxes of dirt. They go to fight Dracula. He manages to escape by just jumping out a window and running away. And then he flees back to Romania because for some reason Dracula is terrified of these incompetent men. Anyway, he flees back to Romania. There's a big chase where they're trying to get him. They know what boat he's on. They're going down the river on horses and in boats trying to catch him. And then they stake him at the end and he turns into dust, and it's really anticlimactic. Yeah. So that is sort of the premise, that is the characters that we're meeting and what's sort of happening. And you might notice that actually in that character list, I didn't mention Dracula. And that is sort of my first point about this book, is that Dracula is very absent presence throughout this entire book. Considering the book is called Dracula, you would expect him to be in it more. And I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing, but I do want to talk about it. So when Dracula is in the book, and this is primarily at the beginning when we're just seeing Jonathan's journal entries, he is easily my favourite character. He is very dramatic, comes across as someone who's just lonely and doesn't have very good social skills. Obviously, you know that's not true, but that's how he's written, and almost just quite funny. And one thing that's very interesting to me is thinking about how different people at the time of publication would have seen that. So I was talking to my mum about it actually, and she was like, oh no, it was really creepy. And I was like, no, it was just funny. Like things, for example, there's a bit where Jonathan's shaving and he has like a little mirror in front of him, and there's no mirrors in this castle. He has a little mirror in front of him, and obviously he can't see Dracula in the reflection because in, you know, this, vampires don't appear in reflections, as they don't in many interpretations of vampires. But then he turns and realizes he's standing directly behind him, or he whispers like hello in his ear or something, and he's like, what the fuck, because he couldn't see him. He had no idea he'd like snuck up on him. And one, I find that hilarious that Dracula's like, I'm just gonna sneak up on this guy and whisper hello in his ear. And two, because Jonathan accidentally cuts himself then while he's shaving because he jumps, and then Dracula's like, oh, it's all this fucking mirror's fault. Obviously he doesn't say it like this. It's all this fucking mirror's fault. you know, you need to be careful in this country because cutting yourself like that could be really dangerous. And then he just throws his mirror out the window. And to me, that's hilarious. It's so overly dramatic. It's so funny. And that was why I liked Dracula so much as a character, because I didn't find him particularly scary. There are some bits later where, like, okay, yeah, maybe this guy is a bit scary. But generally, I just found him quite funny. And, you know, maybe if he'd had more of a presence in the book, I might not have thought that. But also there's the fact of, so Dracula is quite often compared to animals when he's actually there and the characters are describing him. So I think there's a part where he's described as, like, panther-like. You know, can he turn into a dog? So he's quite often described as quite animal-like, as a way to really highlight the fact that he is not human and he doesn't come across as very human. He's very obviously inhuman or undead or a monster or whatever you want to call him, through those frequent comparisons to animals. But one of the that happens very early in the book, which again I was talking to my mum and she was like, no, I thought that was really creepy, was Dracula can climb down walls. Think of What We Do in the Shadows and Nadja climbing up the wall to flash their neighbour, I don't remember his name.
Look at me!
Don't stop that! What are you doing?
Woo!
It ain't natural!
Are you enjoying watching me, Sean?
He can climb up and down walls like that. And it's described by Jonathan as took off again lizard fashion. And I don't know why, but that description was just so funny to me. It did not sound scary. It was just hilarious. So while there is a very creepy element to the house itself, and the things happening in the house, Dracula, when he's actually in the scene, physically present, I don't find him scary at all. I find him funny and just silly. When he's not there for the rest of the story, because like I say, he's quite absent, you just kind of get hints of him, like a bat at the window, or sort of like glowing red eyes, or like, you know, Mina and Lucy just suddenly being really drained, but we don't see him, he's not there. Or we get a lot of interaction with, I should have mentioned this earlier, one of Dr. Seaweed's patients in the psychiatric unit that he owns. Clearly, from literally the first time we speak to him, it's so obvious that Dracula has been in contact with him. But again, they don't work this out until like nearly the end of the book. Anyway, yeah, so when Dr. Seaweed is talking to Renfield, who is the patient, you know, you're getting these hints of what Dracula said to him. Yeah, that's kind of creepy. I wasn't ever scared, but you know, that was more kind of creepy when he's not there. So actually, like I say, I didn't hate the fact that he wasn't there, because although I loved him when he was there actually was that creepy atmosphere to the book when he wasn't there, because he was almost just kind of lingering in the shadows, but you couldn't quite see him, which is exactly what the characters were experiencing. So I think I can't be mad at the fact that he wasn't there, because I think it worked quite well. The next topic or theme or whatever that I wanted to discuss is the idea of religion and sin, which is such a prominent theme in this book that, to be honest, I wasn't really expecting, but probably should have expected given the time it was written at and what this book is about. And, you know, the fact that in modern day, and when I'm talking about modern day vampire interpretations, I am mainly thinking about Supernatural and Buffy. I'm not really talking about other books as much, because I'll be honest, aside from the shit little vampire romances I've read, I haven't read too many other like actual vampires book, which I'm trying to amend, and I'm not including Twilight in that, because even though I love Twilight, we know that doesn't fit with any of this. In things like Buffy and Supernatural, they still very much carried that theme of religious objects repel vampires. So, you know, obviously I was like, oh yeah, that comes from Dracula, but I don't know, I just hadn't expected religion to play such a big part in this. Which, like I say, was probably silly of me, given when it was published. But yeah, let's talk about it. So the first thing you really get to see, I mean, there's casual mentions of religion throughout. Like, for example, characters will say, like, they don't say I'll pray, but, you know, the word God is used, and it's them asking for things or praying, especially Jonathan when he's in the house at the beginning and he's quite scared. So that is a topic that's there, but it's not too big. And then the first time you really start to see it, I suppose, is, and this is not I suppose it more falls under the umbrella of sin, and also I suppose society's views of women at the time specifically. There's all the female vampires that we meet. So there's 3 female vampires that are in Dracula's house when Jonathan's there, and he only ever meets them once. And also after Lucy gets turned, all of these women, they are always described as very sexy, and I can't think of like the actual words they use, but that's the thing, they're sensual, they're sexy, it's all about their big lips, stuff like that. There's very much this connotation of she is undead, she is a demon because she is behaving like that, and a woman would never behave like that or shouldn't behave like that, so obviously there's something not right about her, that sort of thing, which again, you know, I appreciate that that was society's views at the time, but again wasn't something I really suspected or expected, sorry, to be a big part of it. Especially with Lucy, there's all of this despair from the men when they see her when she's undead, of her just not being pure anymore, which just at times just felt quite gross to read, especially because aside from Dracula, who to be honest is never described like that, actually he's only ever described, like I say, as being quite animal-like to show how he's not human, but then the women are all described in this overly sexualized but in a way that women shouldn't be able to show their sexuality way, and that's what shows us that there's something wrong with them kind of way. And it's all focused on them and them being turned and something being wrong with them, and oh, we must save the women. And I have a whole thing to talk about sexism later, so I'm not going to go into that too much, but that is a very big theme of the sin side of it. And actually it's not necessarily about them drinking blood or killing people, it's more about how they're appearing like that, and that being a sin and wrong, I suppose. And there's also sort of this constant discussion of blood means life, which again I suppose is quite a religious thing, and also I suppose way back when in medicine, not really at this time in medicine, but you know, before that in medicine, there being that very big thing of blood is the essence of life, and you know, your blood can go bad, and so we need to do bloodletting to get stuff out, or you know, you need more blood because you don't have enough of life's essence, things like that, when you know, science wasn't really as advanced, they didn't really understand illnesses very well. But there's also that religious component of it, which again I'm going back to quite Catholic things here, because it does very much feel like this is what it was focused on, and you know, most likely was, given the fact that it's set primarily in England, in the like mid to late 1800s. Yes, it's probably based in the science of the time, but also this very religious thing of blood is very important. And this then plays into the sin bit a little bit more. Lucy in this book had 4 blood transfusions from 4 different men, which my problem with that was very unlikely at this time you would have survived. That was my problem with it. The book's problem with it, or the men in this book's problem with it, was quite gross, actually. It felt really gross to read, was that, you know, her first blood transfusion was from Arthur, the man she's supposed to marry, and it was all like, oh, I've saved her, my blood is in her body, this is great. And then she needs 3 more, but Arthur's already given blood and he's not there anyway. So the 3 other men, not Jonathan, Van Helsing, Dr. Seaweed and Quincy, give their blood instead. And there's this whole thing of, God, we can't tell Arthur about this because now she has another man's blood in her, and he can't, like, it was weirdly sexualized, and it was just a bit gross, and I didn't enjoy that at all. But again, it was always playing into this whole thing of, it had already kind of been set up with Lucy saying, I wish I could just marry 3 men, and then her having to have 3 different men's bloods, 4 different men's blood in her, being like, oh, impure. And then when she does eventually become a vampire, it's like she's impure, she's not the woman we knew, she's a whore. That's not what they say, but you know, that's the implication. So again, sort of all of that, it's like this timeline of sin for her, which, you know, it's not there to say that she deserved it, it didn't come across as that, so I don't really know why it was there. But there is this definitely this very big theme of, yes, to an extent, Dracula is a awful sinful demon, but it's mainly more so focused on the women, which, you know, what a surprise. And then, yeah, the only other thing I'll say about this, I know I said sort of then when Lucy got turned, they were all like, oh God, she's not pure, God won't accept her, blah, blah, blah. There was, you know, all of these men had really liked her, and we're in Dr. Seaweed's point of view at the time, I think. And, you know, he's, up until that point, been like, oh, I really don't want to cut her head off and stab her, it's Lucy. And then he sees her as this big-lipped, voluptuous woman. And the exact phrasing is, he takes savage delight in killing her. Which made me really uncomfortable, honestly. I didn't like it much. Because it was like, oh, this woman is not what I think. And I know she's a vampire. I know she's a vampire, but that's not what we're talking about here. This is, oh, I mean, we kind of are talking about that. I know she's a vampire, and it's more about, oh God, this has just proved to me that she's a monster. But it's not the fact that she's kidnapping children that's the problem. And that's why it felt gross, if you know what I mean.
Alleged, in my opinion, personally, how I feel allegedly.
So this is kind of going into the sexism bit a little bit, but there is, you know, it's more strongly, I think, placed in that religion, ideals of the time, society, culture, that sort of thing, if that makes sense. My last theme, I've just called powerful white men. And this encapsulates a few different things that run through this story that I think all culminate in that thing of they are powerful white men, the majority of them. I've already touched on the sexism a little bit there. There is also just general themes of it throughout. For example, saying Mina has the brain of a man because she's not overly emotional and shit like that. It was a bit that, it wasn't overtly sexist, but sort of Mina offering support to Arthur after Lucy's died, and her saying, oh, you know, I'll be there for you, I'll be a friend, whatever. And Arthur, instead of just appreciating that, is like, well, I'll be there for you too, and that's all you really care about, isn't it? A man's approval. And that's not exactly what he says, but I can't remember exactly what he says. But that's what it felt like. And then just generally, I found it quite weird to read at times Mina and Lucy's letters or points of view, because it was very much like, oh my God, men are amazing. We must worship men. They're all so great. All of these men are so nice. Which just, maybe that is how women spoke back then, but I would be interested to see if their journal entries and letters would have been different if a woman had written them instead. And I'm not accusing, I don't know anything about Bram Stoker as a person, and apparently his mum was like a really big feminist, I think, but I don't know, it just would have been quite interesting for me to see a woman of that time actually write that, because did they actually feel like that? I would bet that they probably didn't. Was it satire? Because there is a bit where Lucy is talking about how ridiculously dramatically emotional one of the men are being. I don't remember which one it is. And she's describing the whole thing and saying about how women are supposed to be the really emotional ones, and that, you know, men are really strong. And then she's like, oh, how different, you know, men and women's reactions to things are, even though she's clearly just shown that he is reacting in the exact same way that women are supposed to. And I was like, this has to be sarcasm. Like, this can't be written seriously. But I couldn't tell, you know? So it's a little bit hard with that. But yeah, there is just generally that theme of women just being like, oh my God, men are amazing. And then men being, this woman must be pure. And stuff like that, which, yeah, again, I've just dropped my paper. Which, you know, I'm not gonna keep going over that because I feel like I've honestly captured most of it quite well in the sort of religion theme there. That is where a lot of it falls. But I would say that it does play quite a big part, especially in the later chapters, when Mina's sort of starting to get more involved with the hunting party, I suppose, or whatever you want to call it. There is also like little hints, not hugely, it's not a huge thing, but there is little hints of racism throughout this as well. The main thing this comes from is when Jonathan is first in Romania, and there's this whole thing of Eastern Europeans being very superstitious, but to the extent of it almost felt like him being like, oh, I'm so much cleverer than these people because they believe in all of this and I don't. And one, it's like, well, you were fucking wrong, that was all true and you should have listened to them. But it also did kind of give off that vibe of we in the West are cleverer, they aren't clever enough to understand science and therefore they rely on these superstitions. That is what it felt like. So again, it's not a huge part of the book that I can remember, but it is still definitely there. And again, it just very much felt like that. I'm a powerful man from England, therefore I know better. That's what it felt like. And I think this is just something that comes back throughout in quite a few different ways. So there's the interactions that Dr. Seaweed has with Renfield, his patient, that very clearly shows that he doesn't see him as a human being. I think there's one point where he refers to him as it. And just generally, there's a theme there of Dr. Seaweed needing to display or exert his authority over this patient and just seeing him as an object to be studied and an experiment or something interesting, you know, not seeing him as a person who needs help, which again, I think that's not necessarily just down to the powerful white men. I think part of it is also society's views at the time, and you know, there wasn't really great understanding of mental health and stuff like that. So of course we're not going to see a psychiatric unit where, you know, people are actually properly assessed and have therapy and, you know, all of that. But it was very obvious throughout, and that was one of the big reasons why I really didn't like Dr. Seaweed. There were many reasons why I didn't like him, but that was one of the big reasons, was because it was that constant need for him to exert his power over this quite vulnerable person. The other way this comes up is through Arthur just being rich. Like, I'm gonna find the quote actually, because I think it captures it quite well. Okay, the teeth are unfortunately coming out because one of them, the molding stuff has fallen out. Okay, so sorry, this quote. Yeah, this is from Mina, when they are about to embark on following Dracula to Romania. And two, it made me think of the wonderful power of money. What can it not do when it's properly applied, and what might it do when barely used? I felt so thankful that Lord Godalming Lord Godalming is Arthur. I felt so thankful that Lord Godalming is rich, and that both he and Mr. Morris, who also has plenty of money, are willing to spend it so freely. For if they did not, our little expedition could not start either so promptly or so well equipped as it will within another hour. So it really does, because I did think, you know, there's a lot of times throughout the book where Arthur is just like, oh yeah, I'll just pay to have this locksmith essentially break into Dracula's house for me, and no one will think anything of it because I'm a rich lord. And places where they're able to get access to documents that they only can because he's a lord. And the fact that it's then so plainly and cleanly explained, I actually found quite funny, because I wasn't expecting it to be. I thought it was just like, oh yeah, this is upper society, you know, this is what happens. But it was kind of that thing of, yeah, this is only all possible because they're rich, you know, they wouldn't be able to do any of this otherwise. That bit really highlighted for me, they are only succeeding because all of them are quite well off, quite well known men from England. Well, actually no, two of them aren't from England. Van Helsing is Dutch. Is he Dutch? And Quincy is American, but still, you know, quite well off, quite well respected white men. That's the only reason they were able to do all of this. And I think this really stood out for me at that point, because the whole way through I'd been thinking, these men are all so fucking incompetent. Dr. Seaweed especially, many times, Lucy didn't need to have as many blood transfusions as she had, because it's his fault that he just fucking left her unobserved for 2 nights for Dracula to come and drink off of her. Incompetent man. Also incompetent when it comes to Renfield. Van Helsing as well, just prefers to give really long speeches than actually just, you know, come on and get things done. Explain things to people that don't need to be explained to people, like the fact that they need to cut off Lucy's head to her recently bereaved husband. They were just all rubbish, but they managed to get everything done. And that quote there really sums up how they're able to get everything done, because they have money. Especially it got to the bit where before Dracula flees to Romania, they are they like, what's the word, surprise him at his house. They like do an assault on his house when he's not expecting him to be there, and he just runs away. And I was like, you're a centuries old vampire, you're clearly very powerful, and yeah, they've destroyed a lot of your ancestral soil, but you still have one box that they haven't found, and you've still got loads of powers you can use. Why are you scared of these incompetent men? But it's because they have connections, that's why. So that is all my thoughts on Dracula. In fact, I'm sure I have many more. I could honestly talk about this book for quite a long time if I just went through and looked at my annotations and quotes and stuff that I highlighted. And despite those problems there and the things that I've kind of complained about, I did actually really enjoy this book, and I think I enjoyed it because it did make me feel quite a lot of different emotions. It was, you know, I enjoyed Dracula, he was a great character. I was quite angry at characters a lot of the time. I wasn't sad, but you know, there was a range of things, and I really got into it. I think the pace of it could have been picked up. It got really slow halfway through, and it did take me quite a while to finish because of that. It was good, I really enjoyed it. Probably definitely one of my favourite classics I've read so far. Still not better than The Picture of Dorian Gray, but could, you know, be coming in a second place. We'll see if that changes as I read more. If you have read this book, I would like to know what you think, because I've heard quite split things. Like, I think people either really enjoyed it or really hated it. So let me know what you thought as well of the things that I picked out. If you have any differing opinions, or if you picked out any things that I missed, would love, like I said, I could talk about this book for days, so let's have a chat in the comments, go for it. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and I will see you again soon. I just had a lisp because of these teeth.